Perfect. I'd like to welcome everybody to the July 9th Committee of the Whole meeting. The Town of Hinton respectfully acknowledges that it's located on the First Peoples traditional lands. We recognize this traditional territory to show respect and understanding to those who walk this land since time immemorial. Today, we uphold our ongoing responsibility to work together in the spirit of the intent of the treaties with all the First Peoples and nations that call this place home. The town expresses gratitude for the opportunity to build a better community on these sacred lands for generations to come. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 4:02 p.m. First item is the adoption of the agenda. Council, is there any additions or amendments to the agenda tonight? Seeing none from council administration, is there any additions?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to add 4.5 Wildfire Prevention Committee.
Okay, so item 4.5 Wildfire Prevention Committee. Councilor Watts?
Chair, I'll make the motion to add that to the agenda.
All right, so that committee add item 4.5 Wildfire Prevention Committee to the agenda. So please vote now.
Favor.
Councilor Stashik voting in favor. That is carried. Councilor Watts?
With that, I'd like to move that we adopt the agenda as amended.
So the motion on the table is that committee will adopt the agenda as amended. Councilors, please vote now.
Favor.
Councilor Stashik in favor by hand. That is carried. Citizens minute with council. Minute with council provides an opportunity where residents can address the council regarding issues, events, celebrations, or concerns. To ensure a constructive and welcoming environment, please adhere to the following guidelines. Keep your remarks concise and limited to 1 minute. Address the chair of the meeting when speaking to council. Avoid asking questions, as this is not a question and answer session, and maintain a respectful tone of language. Administration, is there anyone present, either personally or online, for minute with council? No, there isn't. So that moves us on to agenda item number 4. Item 4.1, the bursary policy. I'll hand it over to CIO Vanessa.
Thank you, and I will turn this over to Ms. Purple.
Thank you. Good evening, committee. So the first that you saw this information item was back in March of 2024. And administration was requested to bring it back to a future committee meeting. So presented for you in the package today was our initial draft of the bursary policy. Again, just a reminder that this money is from Trans Mountain Pipelines, which is part of the community project agreement that was signed back in 2020. Funding for the entire program is $50,000 from Trans Mountain and $400 being added from the town of Hinton from the investment income on the monies while it was in our possession, but we didn't have a plan for it. There are some restrictions that Trans Mountain has laid out as the programs of study qualifying under the bursary must be related to the pipeline industry, must be in trades, technology, or apprenticeship programs. And we're to develop a program that removes barriers. So part of those reductions, we're looking at the higher bursary amounts, so enough to really be impactful and make a difference to a student returning to school. Increasing the age bracket to accommodate those that may be looking at a career change later on in their life. Plus also it's noted that those closer to age of 18 may have more family support to be returning to school or carrying on with school. We're focusing as presented, the bursary is focusing on acceptance to the post-secondary, not looking historically back at what their high school achievement may or may not have been. We're working to make sure that the application remains simple, easy to use, easy to understand, and that the requirements for submission will provide the committee an opportunity to make a good determination of eligibility, but not to create barriers for the potential applicants. If the committee finds the program acceptable as laid out, administration is seeking consensus to bring it back to a future council meeting. And when we could bring it back would be determined on any changes that committee requests this evening. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Very much. Is there any questions from council? Councilor Voss?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick question. First, I like the idea of the up to 35 years of age. I think there's many people I've run into that decide to change careers and don't have the financial resources to do that. So agree with that. I just have one question. If a person can apply multiple times, I'm assuming, is that correct?
Through the chair to all committee, it was written in the policy that they could apply up to 3 times.
Okay.
Providing that each application showed proof of progression through the same program. So you couldn't apply 1 year for potentially trades and then the next year apply for first year of university. You need to be progressing through.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Ferguson?
Thank you, and through the chair to administration. I have a question for, in section 3.1.2 or line 3.1.2. It says parents or the applicant. I'm curious what the intent of this was. Is it supposed to read parents of the applicant? Or is it talking about 2 separate groups of people who could own property?
Through the chair to members of the committee. So through the lens of this being the community agreement with Trans Mountain, we wanted to make it as open as we could. So I guess the assumption being if the applicant has parents residing in Hinton, they potentially went to school here and they were community members for a number of years. We ask for that in the application form, just qualification of that. Secondly is perhaps because it's open until 35 years of age, the applicant may have at one point in time purchased a property in the town of Hinton and now moved on to follow post-secondary, but they have retained their property here. So we're just looking for that community connection was the only intent through that.
Okay, I understand the community intention. That's fantastic. I'm curious if the language parents or the applicant currently owns property in Hinton is sufficiently precise for a bylaw. In my mind, when I read it, it seems like a typo. It should be parents of the applicant. The applicant either resides in Hinton or owns a property in Hinton, or their parents own property in Hinton, something.
Through
A little easier to read. Be nice.
through the chair to all committees. So being a policy, I did not run this through legal, like rather than a bylaw, but we can certainly take and have that particular section and in fact, the entire policy read by legal for any potential tripping hazards in the future. We have no problem with doing that.
Do you have a follow-up, Ferguson, or good?
I have another question. So back
Okay.
to you, please.
Councilor Voss?
Yeah, building off of that, I 100% agree with the language. I guess the only thing, not to get too nitpicky, but if we have parents or caregivers, because it may not be the parents necessarily, could be living with grandparents depending on the family situation. So just as long as we encompass the other alternatives, that's all. So.
Through the chair, thank you. We've noted that.
Ferguson?
Thank you, through the chair, back to administration. So further on to point 4.4. In 4.4.1, the point system for the rating criteria. Under rating from financial needs assessment, it's just got a placeholder there. Did you need input from council for that, or is that something that will be determined? We see it next.
Through the chair to all of the committee, that is a placeholder for myself. I simply ran out of time. I didn't get that final piece done ahead of this, but in discussion with senior leadership, I felt it was ready to go forward for input from committee at this time rather than hold it up further.
So we have more comments from council on this item? Seeing none, Madison?
Well, I'd like to take a recommended action, then the committee requests administration bring the bursary policy FN number 1400 to a future meeting of council.
So we're seeking consensus that committee requests administration to bring the bursary policy FN number 1400 to a future meeting of council. Councilors, please vote now. And that motion is carried unanimous. Okay, that moves us on to agenda item 4.2, the transportation level of service policy, and I will hand this over to you.
And Ms. Jupe will present this.
Thank you, and through the chair to all of the committee. The report before you tonight is an update to committee on issues around the Hinton Public Transit Service, which were raised first on March 12th. Primarily, administration is wishing to return a level of service policy that accurately captures council's current aims for the service. So overall, there are 6 points of update on Hinton Transit in this report, each with an associated recommended action. And administration is seeking 2 consensus points tonight. But first, to go through the points of update at high level, items 1 and 2 respond to committee's direction to investigate additional sources of income. And statistics indicating that steady growth in this area is already being achieved. Your input on that, however, is of interest. Items 3 and 4 center on the level of service itself with reference to the 2018 transit review with a pertinent guide, which is still considered a pertinent guide to level of service options. Items 5 and 6 update committee on issues around bus supply, outlining near future grant opportunities that could facilitate the town acquiring its own fleet and further reducing costs of service. The recommendations related to those 6 points are restated and summarized on page 13 of your agenda. Consensus being sought is that committee refer a draft level of service at the current limited service level to a future committee meeting, and that committee refers the question of an additional $3,500 budget to a future council meeting. The aim there being to top up the electrification study and position Hinton as strongly as possible in the anticipated federal grant program in 1 to 2 years. So with that, I'll take any questions that you have. It's a comprehensive report. There's lots there, but you know how I can help you with that.
Questions from council? Awesome.
So I guess my only question, I know we're in this study currently right now with the electric buses, but we've never really had a more in-depth conversation about that, about, you know, the feasibility and stuff. So that's what that $3,500 would capture, is to take a look at the switchover. Is that the case?
Through the chair to the rest of the committee, not entirely.
Okay.
So we are going to get that study returned to us. August 16th is the anticipated end date of that study report date.
Okay.
And they are going to do a presentation, but it might be an in-person travel to presentation around the end of August. And it's basically comparing our feasibility with a number of others, largely speaking. However, they have offered, they're saying that there's residual money in the grant funding that Qtrip got the consultant to do this work. And that they're willing to do, if we're interested, an 80-20 split on the costs of further investigating the total greenhouse gas emissions of one of our buses for its life cycle. So that'll give us just a little bit of a top up on the electrification study to give us a bit more ammo, let's say, or information pertinent when the federal grant funding comes forward. We'll be in one of the few municipalities in Alberta with that information ready to go. I mean, that was grant funded. So this is $3,500. I think Qtrip's portion of that is 18,000. If I recall.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else, Madison?
I have there's through the chair to administration, I have a question about a little bit about our level of service. Looking at our ticket pricing, when somebody buys a cash fare, is there a transfer component to that?
So great question. I can't answer that right off the top of my head. I believe that there's an additional cost for a transfer, but I'll have to get back to council committee with that information in the morning if I may.
Okay, thank you. And just for your background, the reason I've heard that it's difficult to do a round trip with our fare system as it is. And I'm curious about what some of those details are on what a round trip, someone going for groceries say would look like.
Right, so through the chair to the rest of the committee, the cost for one way is $3. So if you get out, go and do something and get back home by bus, it's an additional $3. My understanding at this point, but I'll clarify.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else from council on this item? Or census transition?
I'll bring the recommended action forward. The committee reaches consensus to refer a draft transportation level of service policy with the existing service level to a future committee meeting. And that committee reaches consensus to refer the matter of $3,500 of additional budget to participate in a further study of Hinton's transportation system life cycle GHG emissions.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Yeah.
For the consensus,
Thank you. I just have a question regarding the recommendations from administration and how that fits with the recommended action. Some of the recommendations from administration aren't currently part of our limited service, is that correct?
So through the chair to the rest of the committee, a couple of items here are not exactly part of our current level of service. So student rate, for example, is not something we currently have, but we feel like it's an important thing that we can do. And it doesn't actually alter the level of service to any substantive degree, we felt. And so we felt that most of these items were things that we could initiate administratively without a resolution of council. And that would be an example of one.
So specifically, what I would be wondering about is a recommendation that administration investigate adding on-demand components to Hinton Transit. That's not currently a service that's provided, and per this motion, that wouldn't be in the report that comes back, correct?
Thank you, and through the chair to the rest of the committee. So this is a great point, and this is something that we discovered on review of this transit review. The limited service level of service includes potential to move to on-demand within that level of service. We just have never done it. And so there's actually a reference to the report page. There's some recommendations and in it, it talks about at level, basic level of service. On-demand is something that we could investigate and perhaps add on or convert to if that was of interest. It's just that this report is aged to the degree that that was a new thing at the time and not understood to be, not well understood. Since that time, 2018, a lot of communities have implemented these kinds of services and a lot more is known. So limited service level, as per the report, could include a component of that. And that could be, in the way it's worded here, it might investigate it and bring some information back to council or committee at a later date and present it as an option, perhaps to reduce costs or increase ridership.
Can I follow up again? Sorry. So I guess then, just to summarize then, are all the recommendations that are in this report, would they all come back as part of the draft transportation level of service policy?
Thank you, and through the chair to the rest of the committee. I'm not exactly sure. I think most of them, what was done here was we summarized recommendations and pulled out the two or three that we, the two, sorry, that we need committee consensus or council resolution to be implemented. The rest can be administratively implemented. However, that I think is a good example of one that the investigation is something we could do, but we wouldn't, of course, implement anything without bringing that back to committee and then obviously council. It's a substantial, different operation.
Through the chair, if I may. I believe there might be a little bit of confusion, but the draft level of service policy would be what our existing levels of service are only. The other recommendations that have been included in this report is for council to direct separately if we would like those added. But all we're saying is that when we bring forward a level of service policy, it will be for what we do today only, as well as likely for budget time to bring forward a
a proposal for that $3,500 additional budget to participate in that further study, but we're not going to be, if council does not want to look at on demand, the motion that provided in the recommended action would not bring forward on demand options. That was something that we could look at in the future, but we didn't think it was quite time for Hinton Transit System, so it's not included in the current motion. That would have to be added on by council.
So if I may follow. Yeah, so thank you for that clarification. That makes it easier to understand. So the summary of recommendations on page 13 then wouldn't be included in the draft policy. If we want to see any of those, you would need a direction from
That's
committee.
correct. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Madison?
Thank you, through the chair to administration, and just to confirm, because Councilor Stashik brought up a good point, and my assumption was that when this comes back to committee, it's going to be on or after the date where we get the presentation study. The intent from the administration is to bring it to us before the study is done in mid-August.
So if I may, through the chair of the rest of the committee, the intent was to bring it forward pretty much as soon as possible because it is capturing the existing level of service. And as you notice, there's also a recommendation in here that we extend the current contract for a short period of time to position us to dovetail with the upcoming federal grants. We want to have the study ready, the feasibility, the research, and then have a contract that gets us to serves the community until those grants are open, and also gives us a little more time even to implement a grant should we get it. So one of the recommendations is to continue with the current, extending the contract for 1 year to 2 years. And that's number 5 in that list of summary of recommendations. So again, most of the recommendations are things that we can activate without council direction. But the level of service is coming back as the existing. And just one more point about the on-demand is that really that literally that's just us investigating that. Just researching and seeing how we might be able to add that on. Information gathering only.
Duke. Any follow-up from any other council members at this time? Seeing none, so we have a consensus on the table that committee reaches consensus to refer the draft transportation level of service policy with the existing service level to a future committee meeting. And that committee reaches consensus to refer the matter of $3,500 in additional budget to participate in a further study of Hinton's transportation system life cycle GHG emissions.
And sorry, through the chair to the rest of the committee, that should also say to a future meeting of council. That's just an error in the report. My apologies in that recommendation.
Okay, so that committee reaches consensus to refer a draft transportation level of service policy with the existing service level to a future committee meeting. And that committee reaches consensus to refer the matter of $3,500 additional budget to participate in a further study of Hinton's transportation system life cycle GHG emissions to a future meeting of council. Okay, councillors, please vote now. That is carried unanimously. Very much for that. Now we are on to item 4.3.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Anybody's.
I don't know who was first. Yeah, I think it was first.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair to administration, looking at this, then, do we need further direction out of these recommendations, say recommendation number 5, that we extend the current fleet supply contract in order to support what we just passed? Or is that something that we'll complete when we bring this back to committee.
So thank you through the chair of the rest of the committee. That negotiation is underway because the current contract expires at the 31st of August. And there's not a lot of time left for us to, for example, go out to RFP, which would be an important part of procurement for that, for a contract. So extension is almost, we're locked in for an extension at this point, we believe.
Okay, now based off of the motion that we made in March and where we are today, do you require council to make any motions around the contract extension?
Through the chair, if I could, I believe that the original direction was for 1 year. We talked about an optional too, and that's included in this report. And the main reason is just because there's a lot of timing issues that we're trying to line up perfectly, because we have grants that we know are coming at a certain period of time. And if we are going to take a look administratively of transferring from a contracted service, then we want to do it in conjunction with those grants. So there's just a lot of things ongoing. We don't know when those grants are going to come out, and if they do come out, what the deadline is going to be. So if we could have a motion that just committee provides consensus that for administration to extend that fleet supply contract for 1 year with the optional 2, that'll just give us a little bit of breathing room, because there's a lot that needs to happen within a 1 year term or a 1 year period in order for us to try and line everything up when we look at how we offer the service.
Thank you.
Awesome.
So on that, when you say grants, are we specifically talking about the GHE grant or whatever that grant was? Or are we also talking grants specific that if we were to go with our own fleet versus a rent or a contract, is there grants for that too? Because I'm, the reason for the question is because we spend, I believe, a lot on the contract, and should we be doing that internally, and what the cost savings or not savings would be, but is that the grants you're referring to?
Through the chair to Councillor Haas. So the $3,500 really is just to align ourselves with the federal government, because we do expect that the transit grants are going to come from the federal government. So we can have these studies that on how we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. I'm not saying that we're transitioning to an electric fleet.
Right.
There's a lot of different elements within a greenhouse gas emission study. One is how efficient are you? Because there's a variable in how far you drive to provide the service. So that's one element. The other element is there are more fuel efficient options. It could be electric, or it could be hybrid, or it could be anywhere in between. I'm not well versed on the whole technologies. So that one is available, but the reason we're recommending that right now is because we want to have that completed and be well positioned for the capital or the infrastructure grants to possibly look at bringing services in-house at a certain period of time, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So we didn't want to look too far into whether we wanted to transition, because we think that if we are ever going to look at it, there's going to be an opportune time, likely at the end of 2025, where we would have more information to help us make it.
Thank you. Well, if I may, I would like to make the motion that, or seek consensus that I think Steve Campbell captured, and the CEO is. Yes, thank you. So I'd like to move that seek consensus administration extended the current fleet supply contract for 1 year with an option to review a second year to enable the town to complete the implement the grant funding, invest in system engineering, fleet acquisition, and infrastructure. That captured?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So for that reason, all the reasons stated there, we don't want the service to continue, and this way, if there are grants and alignments, then we have the time. So thank you.
Councillor Session.
Thank you. To administration regarding the option to renew for a second year, whose option is that discretion to?
That would be provided to administration.
So administration and the service provider have the option to renew for a second year and it wouldn't come back to council.
No,
You can speak to that.
Yes, you may.
I do have a bit of a concern with that. There's some other recommendations that I would like to see come back and report that might change how we provide transit service in the town of Hinton. And I'm a little bit leery about committing to 2 years before we would see any significant changes to it. You know, what the rest of the committee thinks.
To Councillor Stashik's point, I see the hazard there. I also see the potential with the granting landscape being very fluid at the moment for transit, and I think we're well positioned. And this puts us, especially with the additional study, very well positioned for some of the granting options, and I kind of see this as an opportunity to give administration the option of extending our existing contract. The situation where we're in right now, where we're voting on this, and our existing contract's up in a month. We could be putting ourselves just into a rush next year by only going for the year. This might be able to buy us a little bit of leeway, and we're not guaranteeing that we don't make changes. And we could always take administration's option to renew away at some point, I imagine, with the order of council. Perhaps you can see open fair with that.
yeah, through the chair, and the only reason that we're proposing an optional two is. To the mayor's point, if we do run out of time and we don't have all of our ducks in a row prior and the grants aren't out, for example, and we need to wait a little bit longer. We just want to have that option to give ourselves a little bit more breathing. But the intent is, council needs to agree on. What services we're going to provide if we're doing that through this level of service. Council is also going to need to agree to how we provide the service, and we intend on bringing that forward. Hopefully in 2025, but with how unreliable senior levels of government are with those grant programs, and when they come out and we are going into an election, we just wanted to ensure that we have something on the books for if we do need to extend it a little bit longer to align all of these different items, that we have that option.
So and then through the chair of the rest of the committee, just to add to CEO Pasik's explanation there. The town of Hinton was expressly invited in a one-on-one stakeholder engagement with the federal government employees and agencies that are designing that grant program. To understand what our needs will be coming in the future, which is very promising sounding, but of course there are uncertainties. However, any kind of grant application that we might make would have to be preceded by support from council on the aims that we're going to be aiming at. Express resolution that states council is supportive of the application, so a letter of support or something like that. So and all of that is expected to occur in 2025 according to the program designers right now. The EOI process and the application process 2025, funding flowing in 2026. Aside from the uncertainties, that's the timeline. That you're understanding.
Is there any other questions? Consensus that's before us? Seeing none. So that committee seek consensus that administration extends the current fleet supply contract for 1 year with an option to renew for a second year to enable the town to compete for and implement grant funding to invest in system engineering, fleet acquisition, and infrastructure. And that's carried unanimously. Councilor Stashik.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to seek consensus of committee to direct administration. It's kind of a modification of the recommendation 4. So direct administration to investigate implementing on-demand services within Hinton Transit. And that's the end of the consensus request. Administration investigate investigate implementing on-demand components, sorry, not components, services. Within Hinton Transit. If I can speak to it. I'd like to take a look at some of the hybrid on demand, how that would fit with our current structure, as well as the other option that's in the Dantech report, which is to look at going to full on-demand service with no scheduled transit. I'd like to take a look at that. Anecdotally, I've heard that smaller communities with lower ridership actually see significant benefit from going to on-demand only, lower cost to the municipality, better service for the users, and increased efficiencies. So I would like to see that as an option. So the current system, a hybrid system, and an on-demand only system. I think it would be worth taking a look at the costs and feasibility of those. Thank you.
Councillor Stashik. Any other comments to the consensus that's on the table? Ms. Jukes, you have a comment?
Through the chair of the rest of committee, so that's a wonderfully clear consensus statement for administration. However, my concern would be that the in-house expertise may not be, we may not be in place for this kind of investigation in the sense that it's fairly easy to get proposals from service providers, contractors who want to bring this service to a community. You can get that kind of business case from them. I don't know if that's fulsome information. And I don't really understand in this consensus statement exactly what administration is expected to produce in terms of the data research, system design. So my concern is, would we be able to return what is expected and actually to what level is that research expected to achieve?
To that extent, all.
Sure, I mean, the Dantech report touched on it. It talked about all three of those models. I would be an updated version of that, I guess, with maybe some information from some of the communities that have adopted full on demand or a hybrid system. I'm not sure what it would be, but I'm also not sure what would have entailed a recommendation 4, which was adding on demand components. So it's to me, it's a modification of the recommendation 4 that was already in there.
So through the chair, can I ask me, the intent there, I think with number 4 was to basically do a survey of other small communities like ourselves, and we can do that in-house. So gather some anecdotal information from other communities, pull that together in sort of a comparator sort of style report. I think that can be done in-house. Yeah. If an update to the Dantech report is more desired, which is as a higher level of expertise, that might be something we'd have to bring back at budget time to propose for a few dollars to engage in a little bit of an update. So do you see the kind of distinction I'm seeing here, and just wondering what council's appetite is for level of research?
Councillor Voss.
Yeah, how I see it is, I mean, you're gonna bring back information on what would it look like to bring on demand into the town based on anecdotal talking to other communities and things like that. And then based on that, if it's feasible, reasonable to take a further look in it, then yes, then I would discuss then what budgetary options or budgetary impacts that would be and how to put together a system. So I'm not going to speak for Councillor Stashik, but that's how I see this coming back to us in a feasibility study, so of some sort. So I'm in agreement of this. I think based on our community, the seasons we have, based on, it's not easy to get to to the bus stops all the time for some people. This would create an option that could increase our ridership significantly, possibly if they can have an on-demand service. So I'd like to, you know, as a community to take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair to administration, I'll throw in my 2 cents as well. I see on demand, I look at the success of our Freedom Express, and I think on demand might fit into our system really, really well. But I want to see what that looks like in administration's mind. Understanding that we're talking about changes a year from now at the soonest, because that's practically what we can talk about. That high level first overview comes back potentially when this report comes back in August would be something I'd be happy to see. Get some of those on-demand discussions out in the community.
I'll throw myself in the queue. I agree that I see it as a kind of the first step in that investigation process. To say, what could this look like? What could this be? What are some of the pros and cons other communities are seeing? You know, what are other communities our size? How are they looking at this? And then the heavy lifting would follow some of those preliminary discussions is what my expectation would be as well. Anything further from? So. If not, so we'd be looking at committee seek consensus that administration investigates implementing on-demand services within Kingston Transit. Right, and so you may vote now. That is carried unanimously. Okay, anything further on this point? Councilor Stashik.
I just want to make sure that we've covered everything in the summary of recommendations. So number 3, that Kent Public Transit continues at a limited service level of service. Is the direction that's already been given capture that, or does that need to be made?
Through the chair, the direction provided already captures.
Thank you.
Councilor Haas.
Yeah, and of the same mind, I know that it was spoke to that it could be within administration, but I want to make sure, because I agree with the recommendation that looking at a youth or student rate is most feasible. So is that something administration CEO that you would like to have direction from council to assure that that is part of the report, or because it's there? We've made some other recommendations, so I just want to make sure that's captured in the previous direction.
Through the chair to members of council, my suggestion is if we want to bring forward options at the time of a policy or level of service and talk about the rates, the inclusion of a student rate. If you want that to be included, I would make a motion on that.
Thank you, CEO. So I would like to see consensus that just the summary recommendation number 1, the transit rates are held at the current level with the option administration to introduce, or I take out the option for administration, but we keep it and to introduce a youth or student rate and leave it at that. So Stevie Campbell just take out with the option for administration. And as is most feasible, you can take that away too. Can they speak to it? Yeah, I just, you know, I mean, we have busing systems for kids to get to school or youth to get to school, but there's having a youth rate may increase ridership that way. I see a lot of youth walking, which I want them to, but there's the option in the wintertime and stuff. So I think having a rate would be also helpful for parents because they have another option, you know, for transportation of their children, so or their youth. So thank you.
Just a question about the wording of it. Are we directing administration to introduce a youth rate or to come back with options to introduce a youth rate? I thought I'd heard you say, until 2026, comma, with the option to introduce a youth or student rate.
I apologize. Yes, I meant to keep that in there. Thank you, Councillor Session. Sorry, Madam Chair. If I may.
Yeah.
Yeah. With the option, yes. Thank you, Councillor Session.
Something with the seal message.
Thanks to the chair, just because there was a question that I believe I can answer. The fares currently are $3 and it's per ride, so I interpret that to be $3 to the destination, $3 back, or there's an $8 unlimited one-day day pass. That is another option for people to purchase.
Any more questions on the consensus that's on the table? Consent committee see consensus to direct administration that transit rates are held to the current level until 2026, with the option to introduce a youth or student rate. So we can vote now. That is carried unanimously. Session.
Thank you. I have a question about the second recommendation regarding marketing of transit system sponsorships. You understand that the our transit buses are contractor owned, so there would be some question about having sponsorship on the buses, but that said, though, if it's an option, maybe, no, sorry, I'll back up a little bit. I would look to administration for why the recommendation is that it be reconsidered when the town gets its own fleet and not for the next potentially 2 years on the contractor fleet. And I may have a follow-up.
That's it.
To the chair to council. The only reason is because that's a lot of upfront work trying to obtain those sponsorships for existing staff, and if we're only going to have it for 1 to 2 years, we just thought that it was a lot of upfront work that may not be worth it, especially because it is a contractor bus that may have to look at other options and even negotiating with the current contractor or the owners of the bus to be able to do it. So it's just a lot of work. We didn't see a lot of benefit, just being that this contract was coming to an end, and that we'd be able to start fresh if we did look to transition to our own buses, and that would be a good time to start that process, and that would be a lot of or that would be a benefit that we could look at that time.
Yeah, if I could follow up, I hate to say it, but I think we're missing an opportunity to be able to collect some pretty significant revenue to be able to supplement to the ridership fees and minimize the impact on taxation that our current transit system imposes. There's lots of opportunity to sell advertising on the buses, on the bus shelters. I know in the past, the advertising on the buses, I'm talking way in the past when it first started, was significantly more than it is now. And I realize it's a burden on administration to go out and try and sell those sponsorships. But has there ever been any thought or exploration of partnering with a sponsorship service provider who sells the sponsorship on behalf of the town for a share of the revenue that's collected?
So I'll jump in on that one. So through the chair for the rest of the committee, certainly there is revenue available potentially. And one of the ways to do that is to hire a consultant that markets it and takes a share of the sponsorship revenue as it comes in. Generally speaking, they take it up front. Just want to mention that, not in the course of the sponsorship contract. Contract management and marketing staff and fulfillment of the sponsorship obligations after the contract is entered into all take staff capacity. At the current moment, I would have to suggest that we bring forward an operating business case for additional staff capacity in order to manage that. I think that there could be some I think that could be obtained sort of net or not as much money as you might think of getting, additional staff. Just for operations. What I mean to say is that the revenue brought in could offset the cost of that staff person. But a marketing staff person would be ideal for that.
Through the chair, and just for a little bit more context, when we're looking at this, we're also, there's been a lot of different pieces that we've recognized as we're not doing much when it comes to sponsorship. Specifically, recreation is usually the major service that can attract some sponsorship. So when we do look at this, we wanted to look at this as a larger approach to how we do it for a lot of different services. Transit certainly would be one that I do agree, it's revenue potential. We also have a number of opportunities that we could look at within our recreation services and possibly elsewhere, but we wanted to look at that as a little bit larger with the capacity for the buses, but we would look at that for possibly a larger strategy on sponsorships for some of our town assets.
Councilor Stashy.
May have a consensus request in a minute. We'll take a stab at it. That's okay. Certainly open to input from the rest of the committee, but I'd like to see consensus of committee to direct administration to create operating business case addressing marketing sponsorship opportunities within recreation, transit, and other areas. I'm open to suggestion. So I know this discussion is specifically regarding transit, but for CEO Panasik's suggestion that if we're getting marketing or staff that are focusing on marketing of sponsorship opportunities, it could be broader than just transit. That would be interesting business case, I think, to be able to see what a sponsorship marketing individual or department or section would be able to do to offset some of the taxpayer expenditure through sponsorship. Thank you.
Councilor Hollis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'll be in favor of this, and in fact, it kind of aligns, because if I recall, there was also a direction when we discussed the rec center that there was direction to look at sponsorships within the rec center, I believe, when we were talking about the level of service there. And that was added, so that aligns very well with this one. And I do think, sponsorship is one of those things that I think I appreciate administration's comments. It's a lot of work, but it's also work that we aren't utilizing a lot, and there is potential revenue there. So this way, it gives us an operating business case to then make decisions budgetarily, to whether we'd like to proceed with this. So I'll definitely be in favor of this, and it's a good time to do it, because if we are going to be changing our transit potentially, possibly down the road, then we're all set for when that kind of comes about as well. So, yeah. Thank you.
So seeing other consensus to have on the table, that committee seek consensus to direct administration to create an operating business case addressing marketing sponsorship opportunities within recreation, transit, and other areas. Councilors, please vote now. Right, and that's carried unanimously. Any further business on item 4.2? Right, seeing none, we'll move on to item 4.3, housing policy. CL Panasic.
Thank you, Chair. So we're bringing this forward in response to our tactical priority that the town works to increase both the availability options and supply of housing. So we had created and presented on March 26 a housing options report. That report has been further refined based on some direction that we received on March 26, specifically to look at it through the lens of providing non-financial incentives, including regulatory and developmental incentives, specifically that won't affect the tax rate. So when we looked at that, what we were looking at is to move some of the options that provided direct financial contributions. So the stakeholder engagement feedback was provided at the July 2nd meeting, and it is attached to this report for your reference. Through that stakeholder engagement, they really identified 3 of the main items, and there was a fairly clear cut ranking, with affordability generally being the largest concern through the stakeholder engagement process, with limited housing supply being second, and the lack of diversity of housing being third. So through that housing options report, if we wanted to consider everything, that would be years and years of work. So we wanted to take what we've done, all of the options. We wanted to take what we heard through the stakeholder engagement process and condense it down, and we've done that to seven different options that we thought were pragmatic and could make an impact on Hinton's housing supply, and some of the ones that we should look at least initially. Now, we are only recommending 3, and 3 will also take some time, but it's not to say that after those 3 are done that we look at this and decide where we want to go from there. But we wanted to start this being that it's really mainly being done internally. We just wanted to start this with bite-sized pieces. But our recommendations is to look at the possibility of tax incentives for residential development, review the short-term rental bylaw, and considering the inclusion of tiny homes in the land use bylaw. So we think those are 3 relatively low-hanging fruit that we could review and make a meaningful difference in the starter home or the entry-level home market.
CL Panasic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question regarding the tiny homes part. So previous to 2021, it says that Alberta Building Code prohibited development of tiny home developments. Can I ask what specifically was the concern, or what was the limiting factor in the building codes that prevented tiny home developments?
Through the chair, I won't be able to speak to all of the changes in the building code, but a lot of them had to do with regulations, and the building codes prior to 2021 did not provide exemptions to certain things that are staples of tiny homes, like shared spaces, where a kitchen could also be a living room, or different elements. Tiny homes really have a lot of those shared spaces. Ceiling height was typically one of them, especially for bedrooms. Tiny homes typically have either a staircase or which is building code, or some even have ladders that would go up to a loft into a very that would not meet building codes when it came to ceiling heights. So there was a number of those types of, I believe they had they provided certain exemptions when it came to wind load and a number of different areas. I don't have a full listing at the, off the top of my head, but if Mr. McLaughlin, if you have any other ones that you can think
Not off
of.
the top of my head, I think that the attached report went into some of those details. I think that there's some, the details in there.
Councillor Goss?
If I may, to build off of that, I appreciate and I realize I'm speaking to a report that I don't believe was in this. But it was shared to us by by CEO Knasik, being Vistic Consulting. And they spoke to a lot of those, remember in there, a lot of advocacy to try and change the building codes to try to accommodate the tiny homes. Because my thought is the tiny homes, I think, is an area that isn't much of an option in municipality for people that want to own tiny homes. I remember when we did the charrette, actually a company out of Stony Plain reached out. I spoke to the owner and was very happy to hear that a municipality might be looking at bringing tiny homes into their communities, because right now, unfortunately, the land use bylaw doesn't match in any communities, and the report stated there is some things that we can do. One of them is the square footage, actually, as it's not to limit that and whatever, but I think that for me personally, I think this is something to consider. It's not like we're going to get a flood of tiny homes in our community, but the option is there potentially. If we could explore that, it would give another option for, especially with the cost of building nowadays, it might give a roof over someone's head that can afford a lot cheaper, and it's an interesting lifestyle. So, but I know there's got to be some work done, definitely some research on that. So, thank you.
Councillor Stashik?
Sorry, just a follow-up question. I would like to go back, but I thought maybe I missed something, but I can't seem to find it. Director McLaughlin referred to
Mhm.
a report that was attached regarding changes to building code for tiny homes. Can you just clarify where is that?
Through the chair of council, I'm referring to the same one that Councillor Hodge just referred to, the one
So
that
not
was.
part of the package.
It's not part of the package, but it's
Okay.
emailed to you,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
What can I say?
Thank you, just on the tiny home topic, but one of the things is this is emerging in a lot of different areas, and we do have what we call the tiny home development. But that was built to code without those exemptions, and that, that's great, and that was a requirement of the grant. But when you're looking at these from an affordability standpoint, you look at some of those exemptions, and Director McLaughlin and I were talking about this, those exemptions are really designed to provide living quarters that are affordable. Now, if you have to comply with building codes, the affordability factor of the tiny homes, you start to lose that allure of living in a smaller space. But through our planning documents, it doesn't really fit well, because this is a new emerging thing that has occurred after we approved our planning documents, specifically our land use bylaw. So when we looked at it, there's a number of different inconsistencies that wouldn't really fit well within anything. We do have the only area that it is authorized specifically is the direct control district that we did on Bhutan. Other than that, the only one that we could confidently approve sitting here today would likely be as an accessory suite on an existing parcel, when it wouldn't be the primary residence. So we can approve it, but we would likely call it a granny or a garden suite.
I can throw myself in the queue. I'm definitely quite interested in obviously, I see there's been some great success with the modified tiny homes on Mount that were put in by the town, and I do believe that the hardest residents to house in Hinton is single adults under age 65. And that's exactly the demographic that a tiny home neighborhood would help with. And that's certainly where we see a lot of the greatest needs in the community and some of the struggles. So I think it'd be interesting to see what that report could look like coming forward. Counselor House?
Yeah, I'm gonna make the recommended action. The committee directs administration to bring back a detailed report on the following items. A being the tax incentive for residential development, B, the short-term rental bylaw review, and C, inclusion of tiny homes and land use bylaw. If I could speak to it. We've done a non-residential tax incentive. Why not? This is an area we also need to bolster. We need to build more residential. We talked about this is an opportunity to take a look at, giving those tax incentives for people to entice them to build those residential developments. So I think there's an opportunity there. The short-term rental bylaw review of all three of them, that's the one I'm most interested in exploring. And I know there's been some back and forth as to, how many short-term rentals do we have in our community? I believe there's a report coming to us soon as well as to an update on those short-term rentals and the compliance to our bylaw. But I'm interested in exploring, how many short-term rentals we have and how many are Hinton resident owned and how many are non-resident Hinton owned, and start talking about maybe what can we do to still to bolster the entrepreneurship of our community members, but we want, non-residents to be buying up homes and doing that. So I'd be very interested in that. And of course, the tiny homes have kind of already spoke to it, to look at how could we include other options. Because I think it's not only the 65, I agree with the councillor. I agree with you. But I also think the younger people in our community as well, it's tough to rent. And there's some that could potentially build homes, but not to large extents, but smaller ones to get started. So that's the reason. I think these are reasonable things for administration and council to work on, especially within the timeframe we have in this term. So thank you.
Else, anything for Councilor Stasher?
Madam Chair, just a question for administration, high level, what would be kind of what would we see in the short-term rental bylaw review report?
Chair, Councilor Stashet. So my plan is that initially we would be looking at what options are out there, because I believe that even at the time that we passed ours, if I'm correct, in early 2022. Short-term rentals were still new and still emerging, and a lot of things have changed since then, and a lot of municipalities have taken a variety of different approaches on how you regulate short-term rentals within the community. I know that the senior levels of government have also gotten involved in certain jurisdictions as well. So the landscape's changed quite a bit, and I think that to at least start, we would like to have a committee meeting where we talk about what different options are available. And we have taken an approach. I think it's a reasonable approach, and it could be one of the options could be a few modifications to the existing bylaw, or we could go in a different direction completely. But it would be just taking a look at what's out there and deciding on how we want to move forward.
Thank you.
Anything else? So we have the consensus on the table that committee directs administration to bring back a detailed report on the following items. A, tax incentives for residential development. B, short-term rental bylaw review. And C, inclusion of tiny homes in the land use bylaw. So councilors, please vote no. That's carried unanimously. Okay, so that moves us on to further. Then we move on to agenda item 4.4, which is recycling and producer responsibility.
That will go to Mr. McLaughlin.
It's been the chair from the whole committee. So we've put forward a whole lot of information in front of you. I want to whittle that down and just sort of give you the nuts and bolts verbally. The province has instituted extended producer responsibility, and what that really means is those manufacturers that are producing recycled materials has to now pay for those materials to get recycled. And those producers form groups. And those groups then come in and offer the services. For your normal recycling in Alberta, the group is called Circular Materials, and they have approached us and had a couple of meetings with administration. And we're at a decision point today where, working with Circular Materials, this group that is made up of all the people who produce recycled goods, we need to decide whether or not we get them to pay us to continue to recycle the goods we're already recycling, or do we step away and say, no, you do it? And so that's really the question that's in front of you today. We've included a lot of information. I will come back to you as we go through the process, because there is other decisions that will be made down the road. One of the decisions down the road is, so the province decided which materials and which producers would be responsible for paying this stuff. And so it's not an exact match of what we recycle today versus what the province is making them pay for to recycle. So there may be a few things coming in the future that we might have to bring you and say, hey, we currently recycle this and the producers aren't responsible to recycle that. Do you want to continue, or do you just want to drop it, recycling that item? The other thing is that this is being put in place in two phases. The first phase is they have to come in and operate or pay for whatever it is we do today. And then by the end of, by October 2026, they have to offer a service that matches your garbage. So in our case, that means extending to curbside pickup for recycling. So that's a very positive thing. And then the second aspect to this is all residential recycling. The province has not required commercial to, we're not requiring the producers to recycle commercial recycling. So currently in Hinton, we do help commercial people recycle cardboard. So the producers aren't responsible to pay for that. So again, a future decision will be, do you want to continue paying for the recycling of commercial or cardboard produced by our commercial businesses? So that's the nuts and bolts of it. We're strongly recommending that we opt out and allow the Circular Materials, this what they call a pro, to basically take over and operate our recycling facility. And the strongest reason for that, we've listed a few in the report. The strongest one is currently we contract that service out anyway. And if we were to opt in and get paid to do it, we would be a middleman. And we think that there would potentially be a lot of conflicts being that middleman. And, you know, we have been cautioned by some conferences that we've been to that these groups negotiate very hard, and we just think that we're better off to, you know, step away and let them do it. I think that, you know, the province has downloaded a number of things onto us. We've talked about some of those recently. Here's one example where it's actually moving the other way, and we can actually just step back and say, hey, you do it. And so that's what we're recommending. With that, I'll take any questions.
Awesome.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. I guess the one question, because I know we've talked about in the past, should we be looking at curbside, but the recommendation is quite costly to get the product somewhere else. So this seems like a reasonable option. I guess my question then in regards to curbside, when it comes to that, do they provide the bins and all that, or is that something that the municipality would have to provide?
So through the chair to all committee. We don't have a lot of details as it moves to curbside yet because they're all focused on this phase one of having to take over our initial stuff. So that's where all the discussions are at the moment. But just from my reading and my understanding is they would be responsible for the whole thing. That's my understanding, but again, we don't truly have those details.
Quick follow-up then. My other question is to, under implications of the decision in the report, point 4. It speaks to Ontario municipalities, kind of putting a warning out to Alberta municipalities, and some concerns over the program, and they went into other negotiations of the contract. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because it doesn't really speak to what the concerns are.
Yes, so through the chair to all committee, that's sort of what I was alluding to. There was, we heard that twice at I went to a conference there in Jasper last year, and we heard the same thing there as well. It's basically that, you know, they come in and they negotiate very hard and they have quite strict contracts, and then when it gets in place, they enforce those contracts to the letter, and there's just been some pains. And it was just they were basically cautioning you that if you're going to opt in, you know, make sure you have lawyers on your side and make sure you think it all through, and on and on and on, and just make sure you protect yourself well.
Okay. So if I may, just to clarify then, you're recommending we opt out, not opt in, which then avoids any of these issues?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Further? Anderson?
Well, I'd like to take the recommended action, the Canada Beach consensus for the town to select the implementation model for the producer responsibility organization, PRO, to directly manage the recycling services in Hinton under the new provincial extended producer responsibility EPR regulation, and direct administration to return the report to the next regular meeting of council. And if I can speak to it for a moment.
Yes, okay.
I think this is a fantastic opportunity for us to get a bunch of workload off of administration, and I want to say great job administration getting problems to pass this regulation. Thank you very much. Excellent work.
I just have one quick comment. So there's no implication for any union staff, things like that, because it's currently a contracted service, is that correct? So it's just the end of a contracted service, which would turn into these guys taking over.
Through the chair to all of committee, that is correct. Currently our direct staff, except for the odd work order here or there to help out, is not generally involved with the recycle center. You know, it is a non-profit out of Edson that we contract to run our facility here, and the circular materials that I mentioned has already engaged them, and they were already involved with the last conversations that we had, so they're prepared to directly work with them to hire them to just continue running it. So it's basically us stepping away and say, you hire them instead of us hiring them.
That's excellent work. Thank you for that clarity. Any other comments from council? Seeing none, the consensus on the table right now is that committee reached consensus for the town to select the implementation model for the producer responsibility organization, PRO, to directly manage the recycling services in Hinton under the new provincial extended producer responsibility, EPR regulation, and direct administration to return the report to the next regular meeting of council. Councillors, please vote now. That's carried unanimously. Okay, so that moves us on. There's nothing further. That moves us on to section number 5, reporting. And council reports, I will. Oh.
Chair, if I could, the wildfire prevention.
Item 4.5, the Wildfire Prevention Committee CEO financing.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you for adding this to the agenda. This was something that we really didn't until about 3 o'clock today. We did receive an email, but they do require a response on the wildfire prevention committee by July 12th. So I did want to touch base with committee and have a discussion about some of the comments that we received through Alberta Municipalities Municipal Governance Committee. So that's the same committee that reviews all of the resolutions. So they had some concerns on the wildfire prevention committee. And I can read what they had included. Normally, we don't have an existing position or on a resolution, or there isn't time to report back to members on what comments we add to a resolution. But in this case, the committee makes a good point that Alberta municipality comments at quite a bit of detail where some members may question why the resolution is needed if there's already so much work occurring on wildfire prevention. Based on the information Alberta municipality has stated on page 2 of the resolution, you have a few options. Make no changes and submit as is. Add a whereas clause that explains why a provincial wildfire prevention committee is needed in relation to the existing work. Or 3, withdraw the resolution if you no longer see value. So the additional context that has been provided by Alberta municipalities was aware to us, and that was included in the letter that was provided by the Minister of Forestry. So we were aware of this when we provided it. We still have the opportunity to withdraw the resolution if you don't see value. Or we can look at adding possibly some additional context as to why we see the need for this specific ask while there's similar work that's been occurring. So if we are interested in adding additional context, you know, I hastily proposed some wording that committee directs administration to add a whereas clause that stresses the need to highlight input of high-risk communities. Currently, the municipal involvement is through the municipal associations. This is just prioritizing individual communities, individual high-risk communities. So we could work on some language around that position. And that was my interpretation of, you know, the discussion that we had when we approved this resolution. But if there is anything that council would like to provide or some input, I'd be happy to take it.
Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, to administration. What input do at-risk communities have to submit to the province through their work in doing wildfire prevention? Do we have any input, any say, participation in the province's work in their whatever they're doing in regard to wildfire prevention?
If I may. So the Alberta Fire Chiefs Association did have a resolution last year to that effect to meet the report. You can read it right from the report there. Passed a resolution in 2023 aiming to collaboratively develop a long-term strategy for managing large wildfire fires. That was specifically how municipalities and municipal fire services would deal with this long-term strategy in response to wildfires. And that is currently in place, and there's a lot of activity in that area. So municipalities do have input through their own fire chiefs, and also through emergency management agency. Pretty much the same thing. We do have constant contact through there. We can give feedback, but the decision making is not at the municipal level.
Through the chair, just a little bit more context. They also identify that the Ministry of Forestry and Parks is working on a wildfire mitigation strategy to align with the federal government's wildlands fire strategy. So in preparation of that strategy, they are going to be doing stakeholder engagement. There's no preferential seat at the table for high-risk communities, but we would be able to participate in that process the same as any community in Alberta.
Right.
So through the chair to committee, as I mentioned previously, when we talked about these AUMA motions, we had a lot of broad support on our medical resolution. And I did not find a lot of broad support on our wildfire resolution, specifically because of the letter we got back from the ministry, the work that is going on, and a lot of communities outside of the forest protection area just they look at a different world than we do. So I don't know that this is going to get a lot of support to begin with, and I'm not particularly myself interested in spending more administration time on this one. But I'm interested to hear what the rest of the committee has to say on it.
Stashik.
Chair. I guess I just would have a question for administration, and because I would never support wasting anyone's time. If it's duplicating effort or anything like that, I wouldn't support it. So to administration then, in your opinion, do you feel that the outreach that the province is currently putting out there for municipalities to provide input to make sure that those at-risk communities do have a voice at the table in influencing how the provincial government is developing policies and programs to make sure that we are protected from wildfire? Or would this be some additional incentivization for the province to recognize those at-risk communities?
So, you know what, through the chair, I would say that a lot of the work that's being done is very similar to what we're looking at, but it has that nuance that's different. It's not a preferential seat at the table. You know, they are working, the two municipal associations are working together, and they're working on strategies that are a little bit more overarching and higher level that's going to look at the entire province. I think that what we're after is a little bit more detail and a little bit more hands-on involvement than what they're contemplating, where we want to have a seat at the table. We want industry experts. We want it specific to more high-risk communities within the forest protection area, where a lot of their work they're doing is trying to incorporate the needs of a whole variety of different communities within their work. Now, you know, you do have an option, because there is a lot of work that's being done on this. You could, you know, as the municipality, we could wait and see what that turns out into, because that wildfire mitigation strategy, and to look at aligning with the federal government, you know, part of that strategy might be regional boards. We don't know, right? So if that work could flow into what we're asking, or could not. There's a lot of unanswered questions there, but we do know a lot of work is being done on this item. It's, you know, I don't think a wait and see approach is inappropriate. And if the wildfire mitigation strategy or the work that Alberta municipalities and RMA are working on, if we're not satisfied with that, to propose alternative solutions, you have that option there.
Yeah, thank you, CEO, and thank you for the question from Councillor Stashik, because based on what you're here saying, yeah, I'm of the mind maybe of waiting to see what comes in place. And then, because generally resolutions are when something's not working, we don't know if it's not working yet or not. A lot of, you know, work is being done. Quite frankly, I appreciate these comments, because I think, you know, I recall that letter, but I don't remember as much detail as right here that's being done, that I'm much more comfortable. Even the fact of it speaks to rural municipalities of wildfire, where that letter didn't mention that whatsoever, knowing that, and the Alberta municipalities AM have said that, you know, I would like to see what is happening as a result of all this work. And if then we are still not being considered and have a voice and all those things, then we come to and say, hey, we need a resolution on this. But I think it's a little premature right now with everything that's happening. You know, and yeah, so I don't know where everybody is, but at this point, I'd be interested in maybe withdrawing it at this time, focusing on the others and take a look at it next year. So those are my comments.
Consensus.
Yeah, I'll make the consensus. I'll make the consensus to withdraw the resolution creation of a wildfire prevention committee. And I'm already spoke to it, so.
I'll just speak to it briefly as David Campbell gets it up on the screen. I agree. I think, you know, I do believe that high-risk communities need a voice, their worlds need a voice. And that seat at the table, but I do believe that province has taken a pretty broad dive into some of these things, and I think it's see what they come up with, and confident that we can continue that for at a later date if it's required. So just the consensus as it's presented. Okay, so the consensus is to withdraw the wildfire prevention committee resolution. Is that enough information for administration?
For the chair of the committee. Yes, it is. We will likely bring this forward to a regular council meeting as well, because, you know, to approve the resolution, we did that in regular council. So just to close the loop and to ensure that we do it, make it as clear as possible, we will bring that forward to a future council meeting.
So consensus on the table is that committee's consensus to withdraw the wildfire prevention committee resolution and bring to a regular council meeting. Any further discussion? Great, you can vote now. And that is carried unanimously. Anything further on this point? Now, item 5. Okay, council report. We will start with Mayor Nixon.
Thank you. Through the chair to committee, over the last week, I've met with our MLA Martin Wong, as well as the Hinton Healthcare Foundation, and discussions on our declaration of a healthcare crisis here in Hinton. That is progressing as it does. I've also had numerous media interviews last week, including national media. On CTV News Net Live at one point. And CBC is in town. They were in town today doing interviews with the camera crew. They're going to be here at the town hall at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Myself, again, so we are doing good advocacy there, and the word is getting out. That is all I have this week. Thank you.
Yeah, just a question about that, because I appreciate all the interviews I've been doing. I just, part of when I walk away from that, there seems to be some understanding that a lot of the reason we're in this predicament is because of retired doctors. And I'm trying to think, there's only been one, there's more reasons than retirement and bigger reasons than just retirement. And I guess I'm just a little, is the point getting across that it's not just retirement, but we have doctors leaving because of overburdened, overworked, you know, because I don't know, I'm just getting that kind of sense of it. I don't know if you feel the same way or the rest, but I guess it's just in the messaging.
Well, we're very early in the stages of messaging, and it's very difficult to get into the nuance of the situation in a media interview.
Yeah.
And if we look at the demographics, what we are having is a demographic problem. So the root cause of where we are right now is the demographics of physicians in the province of Alberta is changing.
Okay.
Older physicians are retiring, younger physicians are coming on board. We're losing physicians
Mhm.
at a greater rate than we're bringing them on. But at the same time, it's not a one-to-one replacement. So an older physician, they work in a particular way, they have a particular way of practicing. The younger physicians, they've got a completely different environment in a regulatory sense in their work environment, and their willingness to have no work-life balance, those kinds of things, along with just the changes to medicine. So there's a lot of structural issues there, and no, the conversation's not particularly nuanced yet.
Okay, and that's the only thing, the question I had, and I guess the other real quick one is the last interview, it only was 500,000, but it's actually 1 million that we're investing, right, over a 2-year period or year and a half, was it, or 2 years?
Yeah, so we've
Yeah.
got 1 million over a 2-year
Yeah.
period, and I have the press release, a number of the media outlets caught on to that first 500,000.
Okay.
They didn't catch on, they didn't all catch on, but I've been correcting that in the interviews as well.
Perfect. Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Session.
I have a question too for Mayor Nissen. In your discussions with people in the provincial government, including the MLA or whoever else you may have talked to, do you feel that our message is being heard and that it's being acknowledged and it's being taken seriously? Before you answer, I have a concern. Minister Lagrange was interviewed, and I don't know who she was interviewed by. But they asked her what she thought of it, and her comment was, what Hinton or any other community wants to do to make their community more attractive for a physician to come, that is really something that communities choose for themselves. I find that disingenuous. I think that's silly. It's again abdicating the responsibility that the provincial government has to recruit doctors and incentivize them to go to where they need to go. And that's exactly what has been talked about around this table and in the other room, about not getting into a contest with our neighboring communities to try and offer better packages to the doctors so they come here instead of there. So is the province recognizing this problem?
Councillor Stashik, that's a great question, and those comments, again, when you're talking about these things in the media, it's very difficult to get the nuance out. But for exactly that reason, I'm going to be speaking with Alberta municipalities later this week, specifically about our declaration of the healthcare crisis, and that's one of the prime issues we're going to be bringing up, is the answer from the province that municipalities are responsible to steal physicians from each other is not acceptable. And it's not going to move the needle forward. I do understand that we are getting that messaging. It is the political messaging, and that's what we're getting. At the same time, when I have conversations with our MLA with the ministry, I'm told that there are changes coming down the pipe, that we are going to be getting announcements, that we can't tell you what those announcements are going to be, but they're big, you're going to be happy, and it's coming. So I do feel, as I've mentioned before, when we first got approached by the physicians and we called it up the ministry, we were within days. We had a meeting with the minister. We've had good contact this entire time since I've spoken to Martin every week since we declared the crisis. We're strategizing, and they are working on solutions. But as I've said before, we do need to do what we've done to take local action, because the changes, the solutions from the province is going to take time. They do have, and the further we've dug into this, it is a big intractable problem that they have to solve across the province. But yes, to your question, some of those comments, I think they're a little bit disingenuous, because we are not responsible for recruiting physicians, even internationally. That's the other thing I've heard from some higher orders of government is you need to be out there recruiting international physicians. That's not the job of municipalities either. We need them to step up and start taking responsibility.
Thank you.
Further to report,
Not for myself.
Councillor Ross.
Nothing to report.
Councillor Stashik.
I have nothing.
I also have nothing to report. So we'll move on to item 5.2, Chief Administrative Officer report. Published highlights. So classic.
Thank you, Chair. Starting on page 171, we've included our June operating highlights. A few of the things that I'll highlight, and I did highlight them last time, but I'll take the opportunity again that the town has received 5.9 million in key infrastructure grants, being the Switzer Drive asphalt rehabilitation project, which is currently ongoing, and the upstream water infrastructure enhancement project for 4.9 that is slated to happen in 2025. A very quick recap provided by corporate services on grants. So far, we've applied for 18 grants totaling 14 million. We have about a 50% success rate. We've received about 9.2 million. We have of our denied funding, we've only been denied about 450,000, and we are still waiting on about a little north of $4 million on status updates for the remainder of the grants. So I think that's a very good news story. We've obtained a lot of grant funding this year. I think it's something that is incredibly beneficial to make all of these capital projects and these are only competitive, not including our allocation-based grants.
Councilor Ross?
Yeah, and to speak to that, again, thank you, CEO, and also to the staff, because I realize, grants are one of those things that you got to have all your T's crossed, I's dotted, because they're so competitive. And to get that amount, I believe then that is, the work of administration putting together the reports that are successful, when the applications are successful. So I really kudos to the staff and all that we have gotten, and there's still more waiting, and so that's great news for our community, because then we can take those dollars and put them someplace else, especially that, first the water, but also that $900,000 for Switzer. So that's fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The only other thing I'll say is that, this was the work of council too. And one of the key things that people don't realize is grants don't just happen with an application. They happen years prior. It does require a lot of upfront work, and in a lot of cases, it requires a lot of upfront capital to get you grant ready. And so a lot of the time where people may think that it's just another report that sits on a shelf. I'm not saying that those don't exist, but what we've been using for our applications, we do have a lot of studies, and most studies have been utilized in support of getting this kind of funding. So while people may not see the benefit of a lot of these reports immediately, they are very valuable to administration to be able to pursue these grants. We just approved $3,500 for that electrification study as a good example. That's upfront work that's going to pay dividends in the future. That aligns ourselves with the federal government when it comes to applying for these capital grants. So I think it's a good news story, and it's kudos to the approach that the town of Hinton has taken on a lot of these things.
Bill, anything further on? Councilor Ross?
Yeah, I just have a question on the infill lands. So you're going to be bringing us in August, early September, more in depth. And does that include other strategy options, or is that just specifically to infill lands?
Through the chair, 2 members of council, it'll include strategy related to town-owned land and what we want to do with it. It will also include elements of crown land and what we want to do with that when it comes to possible acquisition, possible other work that we can look at in order to promote crown land as an infill opportunity. So that will be included in that report.
Excellent, thank you.
No other comments, and we would move on to.
Like the move that we go into closed session with the break. You just said how long?
5 minutes.
Okay.
So we will come back there. Please vote. Yes. That is very.
Thank you.